Hey everyone, in this video we'll just quickly have a look at the improvement of the brand new ASUS ROG Xbox Ally X with the AI Z2 Extreme versus the original ASUS ROG Ally with the Z1 Extreme from 2023. For this I was comparing 10 games in two different performance modes. First, both devices set to 17 watt, which is the Xbox Ally's performance mode, whereas I had to manually set the original Ally to 17 watt, since back then they used 15 watt for the performance mode, but I wanted this for better comparability. However, for the turbo mode I used the maximum TDP for both handhelds, which was 30 watt for the original Ally Z1 Extreme and is now 35 watt for the Xbox Ally X when it's plugged in. I was using the newest available AMD drivers and BIOS versions for both handhelds. For the original ROG Ally, I was also using 6GB for the ReRAM pre-allocated, so it has 10GB of system memory left, while it was 8GB for the Xbox Ally X, meaning that one had 16GB of system memory left. And both have been tested in normal Windows modes, as using the new full-screen Xbox experience doesn't seem to have any measurable effect on performance yet. So without further ado, let's start with the benchmarks in alphabetical order. Alright, the first game for today is going to be Assassin's Creed Shadows at 1080p with low settings and FSR2 set to performance. We're starting with the 17 watt mode, and as we can see here, the original ROG Ally is having real issues just to get playable frame rates with around 23 FPS on average. The 1% low is pretty bad at 16 FPS, so this is not playable. For the Xbox Ally X, on the other hand, it scored an average of 34 FPS, which is an improvement of 48% over the original Ally 1 at using 17 watt. Also, the 1% lows have been better with 26 FPS. So overall, this is a pretty big and noticeable improvement that actually makes the difference between playable and not playable. However, with these low settings, the original ROG Ally actually manages to get somewhat playable FPS at 30 watt, which is the device's turbo mode, which is the maximum performance that it can get, with around 30 FPS on average and 1% lows of 21 FPS, but as you can see in the benchmark, it often drops below 30 FPS, sometimes in the mid-20s, so you probably need to further lower the resolution for a better experience here. I mean, the game is running on a Steam Deck, I've seen it, it's possible, but it's not looking very good. For the Xbox Ally X, on the other hand, on the, in this case, 35 watt turbo mode, it already scored 44 FPS, which is a big improvement of still 47%, with much better 1% lows of 33 FPS, which is probably also because of the much bigger RAM that the Xbox Ally X has to offer, and thus offers a much better gaming experience overall. Next up is Cyberpunk 2077, 1080p and medium settings plus FSR on quality, no frame chain activated, and at 17 watt, the original ROG Ally actually managed somewhat playable FPS with around 29 FPS on average, 1% lows at 21 FPS, and for the Xbox Ally X at 17 watt it's a lot better, 38% improvement with 40 FPS on average and 1% lows of 27 FPS, so it's already really playable with 17 watt for the Xbox Ally X. Again, it's kind of the difference between playable and not playable, while 29 FPS, I mean, if you're hardcore, you can go with 29 FPS, but I wouldn't. And now with the turbo mode, which is 30 watt for the original Ally, 35 watt for the Xbox Ally X, the difference shrinks a bit to around 26%. 42 FPS on average for the original ROG Ally, I mean, that is playable even with medium settings and FSR only set to quality, while we're already getting 53 FPS for the Xbox Ally X. Once again, this is a noticeable difference while it is playable on both handhelds. But there is an improvement, and I mean, you can see it and you can actually just feel it. Okay, and the next benchmark was Counter-Strike 2 at 1080p with lowest settings and FSR activated, and I don't know what was happening here. It was pretty weird, but I saw basically identical FPS for both systems for whatever reason. The game is behaving pretty weird, but it's always doing that, not fully utilizing the GPU and the CPU. And since the CPU is basically identical in both systems, while actually the Z1 Extreme does provide better multi-core performance, while the Z2 Extreme provides better single-core performance, which actually should get us more FPS in Counter-Strike 2, so I don't know what's going on, but as you can see, at 17 watt, it's identical on both systems. And it's getting even weirder using the turbo modes with 30 watt and 35 watt, because for whatever reason, the original ROG Ally did score a few more FPS in this Counter-Strike 2 benchmark map, and I don't know why. I've tested it a couple of times to make sure there was no mistake. Both handhelds have been set to their maximum performance, so I can only assume it is some kind of bug with the game or with the BIOS or the drivers, and we'll have to see how that holds up. However, it is perfectly playable on both devices nevertheless. Oh, and spoilers up front, this was the only game where this was happening and the only game where the original Ally was actually faster than the Xbox Ally X. And next up is Diablo 4 at 1080p with the medium settings and FSR set to quality, and as you can see, it's a pretty big difference of 55% here. So the ROG Ally 1 did get around 38 FPS on average with 28 FPS for the 1% lows. I mean, it is playable to some extent. However, the Xbox Ally X at 17 watt is already getting almost 60 FPS here with 59 FPS on average. That's an improvement of just 55%. Great 1% lows here as well with 45 FPS. However, at the turbo modes, the difference is becoming much smaller. We now have 54 FPS on average for the original ROG Ally, and just a bit more with 22% improvement with 66 FPS on average for the Xbox Ally X at 35 watt. And in Forza Horizon 5 I was using 1080p with the high preset and MSAA set to 2, and we're seeing an average of 44 FPS for the original ROG Ally at 17 watt, so the performance mode. And for the Xbox Ally X, I was seeing 60 FPS on average already, which is an improvement again of around 36%. 1% lows have been good in both cases, just perfectly playable overall. Now let's see how it performs using the turbo mode. Now once again, the difference is a bit smaller here. For the original ROG Ally, we're getting 58 FPS on average and pretty good 1% lows, as well as 73 FPS on average for the Xbox Ally X, which is an improvement of 26%. I mean, it is perfectly playable on both. You just get a bit more FPS for the Xbox Ally X, or you could use a higher preset instead. Also keep in mind that I was using 6 GB of pre-allocated VRAM for the original ROG Ally, and in some games that makes sense. In some games it would be okay to use 4 or 5 GB instead and have a bit more system RAM left over for the game and the system, which can lead to better performance here and there, or some games even need 8 GB of VRAM allocation for the original ROG Ally as well. And well, I was testing Hogwarts Legacy at 1080p and medium settings using FSR on quality, and as you can see, especially on the original ROG Ally at 17 watt, it's pretty messy, it's pretty stuttery, which is also caused by the total system memory of 16 GB, which is just not really enough for this game as it eats RAM for breakfast. However, 27 FPS on average for the original ROG Ally, 38 FPS already for the Xbox Ally X at 17 watt, which is playable. That's just again over the 30 FPS border. That's for most people, that's just the difference between playable and not playable. However, using the turbo mode, I saw an average of 34 FPS for the original ROG Ally at 30 watt with 1% lows of 22 FPS, and as you can see the frame time graphs, it's much better on the right side for the Xbox Ally X, which had an average of 44 FPS, which is an improvement of 29%, still pretty good. 1% lows have been much better here with 31 FPS. So overall, clearly a much more fluid, much smoother experience on the right side. And we can also see that the original ROG Ally is somewhat held back as the GPU utilization is not close to 100%, meaning something else is holding it back, probably the RAM. I don't think it's the CPU because they're basically identical, and the Xbox Ally X does not have this issue. So I'm just assuming that it is actually the small RAM size. Next up is Indiana Jones and the Great Circle at 1080p, low settings, FSR set to balanced. And I'm actually quite surprised that it is running on the original ROG Ally at 17 watt at all, with an average of 28 FPS, 1% lowest at 19 FPS, barely playable, not really enjoyable. FPS go to the mid-20s. However, for the Xbox Ally X, already much better, 34 FPS on average, which is in this case pretty small difference, 21% improvement, but it is much more playable, 1% lowest at 25 FPS. And the game, again, eats RAM for breakfast. It needs a lot of VRAM, even on low settings. So we don't have a lot of system RAM left in this case. And yeah, I probably would not play it on the original ROG Ally actually. And here the turbo mode was one of the few exceptions where the Xbox Ally X actually had a bigger difference, bigger improvement, now 23% more FPS, with 35 FPS on average for the original Ally and 43 FPS for the Xbox Ally X. And as we can see here, VRAM usage is much higher on the Xbox Ally X, so it's making use of the 8GB pre-allocated VRAM that we've given it. It can only use around 5.5 to 6GB of VRAM for the original Ally. That's not enough. That's causing the game to give you less FPS, sometimes a few stutters here and there. It's just not optimal, while I have to admit, at least in this scene, it is playable. You know, I mean, 35 FPS on average is doable while it's not optimal. Then again, it's not really optimal on the Xbox Ally X as well, it's just a bit better. Alright, and for Kingdom Come Deliverance 2, I was using 1080p and actually medium settings because the game just looks so good while it's still playable with FSR set to quality only. And we are seeing a massive improvement here because it only got 24 FPS on average, and for the original ROG Ally, and as you can see here, we are down to 19 FPS actually. 1% lows have been around 13 FPS, so definitely unplayable with these settings and this performance mode on the original ROG Ally, while we're already getting 50% more FPS with an average of 36 for the Xbox Ally X, even at 17 watt, even with medium settings and FSR only set to quality. Much better experience, actually already playable. As you can see, frame time graphs look different. It's much smoother on the right side for the Xbox Ally X. And as you can see, once again, since it can use more RAM and more VRAM, it actually does that, and I guess it just benefits from that as well. However, using the turbo mode, we are getting playable FPS for the original ROG Ally as well, with now 35 FPS on average. 1% lows haven't been great, with only 14 FPS. Now for the Xbox Ally X at 35 watt turbo mode, I was already getting 46 FPS on average, still an improvement of 31%. The 1% lows have been much better here with 34 FPS. That's absolutely okay, absolutely a playable experience, enjoyable experience, while it's already looking pretty good, especially on this small 7-inch screen at 1080p. Let's also have a quick look at the benchmark run of Shadow of the Tomb Raider at 1080p and medium settings. We are already getting a playable FPS for the original ROG Ally at 17 watt with 31 FPS on average. Pretty good 1% lows of 25 FPS. For the Xbox Ally X, that was already 44 FPS on average. A pretty big improvement of 42% and good 1% lows of 31 FPS. So it is playable on both, while it is much better on the Xbox Ally X. And for the turbo modes, we're getting an average of 39 FPS or for the original ROG Ally at 30 watt with 1% lows of 32 FPS. Pretty good. Much better for the Xbox Ally X, once again at 35 watt with an average of 50 FPS. Once again, a pretty good improvement, this time around 28%. 1% lows have been okay with 34 FPS as well. Now The Last of Us Part 2 at 1080p and medium settings with FSR unbalanced is pretty demanding for iGPUs. I only saw an average of 26 FPS, not playable, with 1% lows of 19 FPS for the original ROG Ally at 17 watt, while I already saw 36 FPS on average playable, which is an improvement of 38% for the Xbox Ally X with 1% lows of 30 FPS. So in this case, it's just the difference, once again, between not playable and playable. Setting both handhelds to their turbo modes resulted in an average of 34 FPS for the original ROG Ally, with 1% loss of 29. Now, it is already somewhat playable, and we're already getting 43 FPS on average, an improvement of 26% for the Xbox Ally X, with 1% loss of 38 FPS. However, once again, we can see a massive difference in both RAM and VRAM usage, and I'm not really sure how that is going to play out if you play for a while, if you're getting severe stutters, crashes, whatever. It's just much more confident with the 24 GB of system RAM for the Xbox Ally X. While to be honest, I wish they would have just used 32 GB like MSI for their new Claw AI Plus, which would be much more future-proof. Now let's also have a quick look at this diagram for an overview of the total improvement of the Xbox Ally X over the original Ally and see if that justifies an upgrade from your point of view. Now, using the 17 watt settings, that was a pretty major improvement, which I honestly didn't expect. Around 36.9% more performance for the Xbox Ally X on average, while it's also more future-proof thanks to its bigger 24 GB of RAM over the original Ally's 16 GB. However, that weird behavior in the Counter-Strike 2 benchmark is kinda destroying that difference, and if we delete that from the total improvement, it would actually already be 41% on average for the rest of the games. And we'll also have a quick look at the 1% lows for the same 17 watt profile, since that is pretty important as well, showing us how stutter-free or not games actually run despite the average FPS. And the 16 GB of RAM actually are becoming a big problem for modern games in terms of VRAM and system RAM allocation, actually causing bad frame times and bad 1% lows overall in newer games. At the Ally's turbo mode, the difference isn't that big anymore, but it's noticeable and you can actually still feel the difference when playing these games on these handhelds. An average improvement of 25.5% and even 28.7% without the CS2 benchmark run. Alright, and that's all for today. If you liked the video, make sure to subscribe, cause next up I'll be posting a video about the efficiency of the new Xbox Ally X at every possible wattage setting for gaming and the CPU itself. Also, don't forget to give the video a like if the content was helpful for you. Thanks for watching, see you next time, bye bye and tschüss.